Thank you, Senator Murphy, and I really appreciate your leadership and your effort to see that the United States Senate addresses common sense gun legislation. And probably, it's around the hour when people are getting home and they're wondering why we're here, why the senators choosing to hold the floor in this extended debate. And people should know our nation has seen a string of gun tragedies. The senator's home state of Connecticut saw the horrific Sandy Hook shooting of young children. In San Bernardino, we saw an ISIL-inspired terrorist attack. This terrorist slaughtered his former co-workers and innocent people. In Orlando, a disturbed man, perhaps inspired by ISIL, murdered 49 people in cold blood. This was an assault on the LGBT community, a hate crime. And in the last week in my home state of New Mexico, we've seen some terrible gun tragedies. A man is now accused of murdering his wife and 4 children in Roswell, New Mexico. There are so many tragedies, they all have different reasons. But one thing that almost all of us agree on is that we must do more to keep dangerous weapons out of the hands of people who mean harm to others or to themselves. You should have to pass a background check to buy a gun. And if you are a risk to others because of a history of making threats or because you may be affiliated with a known terrorist organization, law enforcement should be able to step in and prevent you from buying weapons. So the Senator, the first thing I wanted to ask for people who are just tuning in right now, what are the 2 amendments that you're seeking to vote on today, and how would they help stem this tide of horrific violence that we're seeing across the country, and as you have continually pointed out, happens every day?
I thank the Senator for the question. It's simple. We're asking for the 2 sides of the aisle here to come together and bring us votes on a bill that would prevent individuals who are on the terrorist watch list, the no-fly list, to prevent them from being able to purchase firearms. And then second, to expand out those purchases that are covered by background checks to the places where gun sales have migrated, which is largely gun shows and internet sales. These are both measures that are supported broadly by the American public. And to the Senator from New Mexico, we're asking for more than just votes on these measures. We think there's common ground that can be achieved. I mean, we don't think there's any excuse why we can't come together and figure out a way to get these passed. We've taken votes in the past, and votes are important, and a vote would be important if we took it. But what would be more important is to bridge our differences. There are plenty of people who aren't on the floor today who can make that happen so that we can pass legislation rather than just debate and vote on it. I yield to the Senator for an additional question.
Does the Senator, and I would ask this through the chair, my offices in New Mexico today have received many calls asking why Democrats are on the floor debating the Second Amendment. And I'd like to ask the Senator from Connecticut if this is an accurate assessment of today's debate. It's my understanding, and I believe most of my colleagues would agree, that the Supreme Court has settled this issue. Congress can't take away that right. President Obama can't take away that right. What we're doing here today is taking steps to ensure that dangerous people are not able to buy a gun. Is that the Senator's understanding?
I thank the Senator for this clarification. I, in fact, don't think there's anything about this debate that we're having that's as they would describe it, a debate about the Second Amendment. There's no dispute that the Second Amendment now, in the wake of the Heller decision, guarantees the right of an individual to own a firearm. That is the law of the land. But that same decision very explicitly makes it clear that it is within the right of Congress to put parameters around that right to make sure, for instance, that criminals or would-be criminals don't get access to firearms. And so this certainly is not a debate about the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is clear. Right now, as interpreted by the Supreme Court, it guarantees an individual's right to a firearm with reasonable conditions placed upon it by Congress. And so we are simply debating the extension of a widely accepted condition on the Second Amendment, which is the inability of criminals, and as we are debating today, individuals on the terrorist watch list own a gun.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. And
Yield to the Senator for a question.
I would ask an additional question here. Last week, several of us announced the We the People government reform package, and I plan to introduce that bill tomorrow. That bill includes several pieces. It has Senator Whitehouse's Disclose Act, which would require mandatory disclosure of all special interest campaign donations. It also includes my good friend Senator Bennett's legislation to strengthen lobbying laws. And I bring this up because I think it highlights the reason for Congress's inaction on gun violence. We've been here before after the tragedy in your state, Senator Murphy, of Sandy Hook. We stood here and debated many of the same issues: expanding background checks, closing the gun show loophole, limiting the capacity of magazines, things that should have been passed but weren't. And I'd like to ask my friend from Connecticut, do you think our inability to pass common sense gun safety legislation is in any way connected to the flood of money in our campaigns from special interests?
I thank the Senator for the question. I think the flood of special interest money into politics is the answer for why lots of things don't happen here. Frankly, it's also the answer for why a lot of things do happen here. And so I think you are spot on through the chair to Senator Udall that part and parcel of this conversation is a conversation about reforming the way in which influence is exerted in this place. Something's wrong when 90% of the American public say that they want expanded background checks. Something wrong when 75% of the American public say that they want people on the no-fly list to be prohibited from buying guns, and we don't act on it. I can't give you specific diagnosis as to why that is, but it certainly speaks to the need for the reform that you're talking about.
Senator, I would ask just one additional question through the chair. Many New Mexicans live in very rural areas near the border with Mexico. Carrying a gun isn't unusual in these areas. It's a different way of life than in Connecticut or anywhere on the East Coast. For example, the entire state of Connecticut is about 5,500 square miles with a population of 3.5 million. Hidalgo County, one of our 33 counties in southwest New Mexico, is almost 3,500 square miles and has a population of less than 5,000. Many of the ranches there are tens of thousands of acres. They're in the remote Boot Heel area of the state, a region that is divided by mountain ranges and borders on Mexico on two sides. So I understand why many New Mexicans feel safer carrying a firearm. They might be miles from the closest help. It might take law enforcement a significant time to reach them. So I certainly don't want to do anything to infringe on their right to protect themselves with a firearm. But I would ask my friend from Connecticut, who's worked on this issue so long and understands this so well, would any of the proposals we're asking to get a vote on take away their rights to purchase or own a firearm?
I thank the Senator for the question. I'll forgive the disparagement of Connecticut's small size, but the answer, of course, is no. The only limitation would be that if any of those individuals were not permitted to fly because they were on the terrorist watch list, they would not be able to purchase a gun. But in 2015, there were only 200 some odd individuals who were on the no-fly list that attempted to buy a gun. Other than that limitation, and I imagine there are very few ranchers, I imagine there are no ranchers that are on that list, there are no limitations.
Appreciate that answer and yield the floor.
Thank you very much.